Morning, everybody. That's better. Given the task of talking to you about ballast water. Ballast water treatment is one of those subjects. Okay. Ballast water treatment is one of those subjects that I've just witnessed. My colleague here has spoken to you. A lot of people tend to roll their eyes, yawn, kind of like, oh no, here it is again. They want to get out of the room and go away. And to be honest with you, I actually don't blame you. Listening to people like George, who's run out of cash, you know, I can actually sympathise with you. When I was first introduced to the subject, the ship owners were fighting the prevention of the convention coming into force. And some of the things that I was hearing were unbelievable about why people would want this not to come into force. There was excuses given all round. Some were plausible, some just unbelievable. The excuses given at such a convention for one side were, well, as I said, not plausible, sorry, I've lost myself here, do apologise, first time up in front of people. Manufacturers, when I was first introduced, were quoting prices of $5 million for a single treatment system. I actually remember one manufacturer at an IMRS event just over 6 years ago. It was quite sad actually. He stood by the bar when someone said, "What's the limit on the bar?" He said, "No limit." He said, "These people here are my cash cow." I was quite taken back by that. It's a very, very sad way to treat a respected old school industry. Maybe I've been brought up differently from a background from working in commercial vehicles. I actually worked for a manufacturer. At a time when the European environmental laws were being forced into the haulage operator, it was a time that if you wanted respect from the persons and the companies that put the food on your table, you needed to work with them and understand their needs and how the European laws would affect their operation and their work together. I watched truck manufacturers go bust dictating the rules because it was easier for them to make what they wanted to comply with European laws rather than accommodating the customer's needs first. I mentioned this a few weeks ago as a highly respected member of the shipping community stood in this room, and they said that you could actually learn lessons from people who've been through the haulage industry when the European onslaught of law hit us. I was there, I smiled at that because I do remember how it affected the hauliers. So this brings me to the points on ballast water. You may touch through a few raw nerves here, and some try and introduce something from a straightforward point of view, and try and rekindle some interest from people who are frightened of the subject. We all know the rules. The IMO finally realised that they were letting manufacturers off lightly in the testing process, and they had to do something about it, the new G8 guidelines. The US, on the other hand, they knew how to be strict on manufacturers testing their equipment. The only thing is they didn't quite know what to do with the results, but common sense prevailed. The ship owners, they kind of got a little bit of what they wanted. The IMO eventually got ratification, and the US really did get one up on us all. So knowing the rules of the convention, how do the manufacturers need to meet the needs of the ship owner? Well, firstly, most ballast water manufacturers pay for a space like this, known as Heaven, a free space to fit a rather large piece of equipment with clean access to the ballast lines. You all know that if you want to choose a system today, it should really be off the list of the manufacturers listed in the US Coast Guard. into double figures actually now on the US Coast Guard approvals. 3 UV systems, 1 chemical injection system, 6 electrolysis-based systems. There's 1 more system apparently has applied very recently, and 1 of the systems has applied for amendments to its rules. But amongst the glossy headlines of the who's who of the ballast water world, there are harsh realities that don't always make the headlines. Every manufacturer is aiming at the low-hanging fruit, the vessel with the easiest installation. Most of today's running systems are fitted on container vessels, bulkers, but mainly they're fitted on vessels with huge amounts of space. This dashboard in this picture is from one of the major league manufacturers. They have US Coast Guard approval. It's amazing actually what you can do with computers. I think they may have actually gone in conjunction with Volkswagen. The computers will tell the operator what they need to know when ballasting. But in the real world, basically, that computer is taking information from what you can see on this slide here now. Interestingly enough, on its sister vessel, the computer was actually taking information from this piece of equipment that had parts missing. This is a major manufacturer. What it should have actually looked like is that piece of equipment actually is a very important part as to how the ballast water system runs. And that's how we left it after we fixed it for the ship owner. The above in my eyes are some of the simplest installations manufacturers could wish for, yet the owners didn't get what they paid for. And that is because the manufacturer has made something he thinks he can sell to an industry forced to buy because of legislation. Just to be politically correct, not all manufacturers are bad boys. There are good people that are trying. One of my colleagues is in the room here. But are they trying enough? What about other legislation that's coming into force, like the sulphur limits that we've heard? MRV standards. MRV standards, they're going to name and shame the polluters. And yet, in the areas where the owners have to operate their ballast water system, the rule makers want you to be clean. Simple question. How do you operate a power-hungry monster of a ballast water management system and try to reduce your energy consumption to meet the other rules? This is something that people aren't thinking about. Well, there are some systems out there with IMO approval that have thought of this. My understanding is that there's 2 systems using none of the previous mentioned technologies that have shown their intent to apply for US Coast Guard early this year, although I understand, to be completely correct, they are currently not active with US Coast Guard approval as of yet. There's also one system that's taken the MRV standards very seriously. They have supplied their letter of intent to the US Coast Guard, and it was accepted last weekend to engage, along with Lloyd's, DHI Laboratories, and using Muad Consultancy. I'm going straight for US Coast Guard approval. But imagine now what is going to happen when the manufacturers are faced with situations like this. This is the real world. This is a pump room with not enough room to swing the ship's cap. I presume you still have ship's caps. Let alone the fact that there's another ballast line 5 metres away, and the photograph was actually taken from as high as the camera could be lifted. 2 separate ballast lines that need 2 separate systems fitting. Without spelling it out, unless the manufacturers are going to wave a magic wand, who is going to go to the expense of installing a system on a vessel like this when, as George says, you can smell the scrapping value? No one's going to pay to put something on something like that. We all know what's coming next. Framo pumps. For the manufacturers, this poses a complete nightmare. I don't even want to think what the ship owner must have to face from a cost point of view alone. The ideal solution to Framo pumps from the manufacturer's side is to just lift the pipe work up, run it back to the deck house, and then from the treatment back into the original pipe work. My advice to anyone who's going to be responsible for the installation and purchase of a ballast water management system is to make sure that you speak to every manufacturer out there, those that are approved and those that are in the process. Big is not always best, and small is not always the worst. No one has a system that works on every vessel, and if the salesman says so, kick him out the room straight away. As your ballast water management system has got to work, as I've been told when I first started for 30 years, remember it has to be maintained. Don't kid yourself that these machines will work on their own and cost nothing to run. Are the manufacturers using a support network to service you? A dressed up way of saying that we're short of staff? Or has the system been designed by the manufacturer to be maintained properly, with dedicated support? A question that you must ask. These machines have to work in the worst conditions you can imagine. As I only have a very short time to speak about ballast water, and time is running out, I just wanted to say a few things here now. It's a difficult subject. It's actually quite depressing, the costs involved and what we've got to go through. So, in the short time I have got, can I kind of finish on a light-hearted joke? I read the rules. I didn't put any logos on these slides. I didn't do any self-promotion. But did you hear about the guy who walked into the room and said to the ship owner, I may have just invented a ballast water system that solves the problems with Framo pumps, and it could be carbon neutral. In fact, it will be carbon neutral. I'll leave it at that.